Well, welcome to the Band of Brothers podcast. I'm here today with Hayden. How you doing, Hayden?
Good.
Good. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for being willing to share your story with whoever's out there listening right now. It could be somebody with 10 years, could be somebody with 1 week. So appreciate you being willing to share that and open up and to let everybody know what it was like and what happened and what it's like now. So let's
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
start at the beginning. Like, when was the first? How old were you the first time you used any mind altering
Um,
substance?
I think I drank when I was 14 and I smoked weed when I was 15. The smoking weed experience was more significant.
Yeah, how was that?
Well, I was in school, skipping school with some high school buddies, and we were passing around a little tinfoil pipe, and I took a hit after a hit after a hit, and I didn't feel anything. And
Hmm.
so we started walking back to this restaurant to get something to eat, and it started to hit me, and I remember it felt like a balloon was tied to the top of my head. I started laughing hysterically, but by the time I got to the restaurant, I quickly got overwhelmed, and it was kind of a scary experience. I remember kind of sobering up thinking, man, I'm never going to do that again.
So you got kind of paranoid.
Yeah, I think I smoked too much for my first time, and it freaked me out, but yeah, I ended up going back to it and smoking again. So
So when you were feeling good, what was it? What was that feeling like? What was it like? Did you like? Oh man, I'm not like when you grew up. Were you feeling a lot of anxiety, fear? Like what were you like? I mean, did it help medicate something? I guess is what I'm asking.
So there was a couple more times I kind of recreational used
Hmm.
marijuana, and the first time I did it by myself, I had a really good experience. I had like a quarter mile walk to the bus stop from my house,
Hmm.
and I took a couple hits on the way to the bus stop, and I put in my headphones, and I was listening to some Kid Cudi. And I remember feeling extremely euphoric, like the body buzz, just being like in one with the music. And I thought it was super cool. It was my new thing. Um, but I had a high school breakup, like my high school sweetheart, my first love,
Hmm.
um, happened around that time too. And after that happened, my substance use shifted from kind of recreational use to numbing my feelings. I wasn't really aware at the time that that's what I was doing, but in retrospect, that's for sure what was happening.
Yeah. So what are you like a junior, sophomore, junior?
Um, 10th grade, so yeah, sophomore.
Okay.
You know,
Okay. So how did using progress in high school, and then how did it affect your life? I mean, negative or positive?
um, the consequences started at a young age. The next summer, so the summer between 10th and 11th grade, uh, I broke into a gas station to steal beer and cigarettes. Got charged with a felony, got put on really tight probation, and then a month into 11th grade, my friend had some Adderall pills and he gave me one, and long story short, I got caught with it, and that was another felony, so two felonies at the age of 15, and they took me out of school and sent me to this youth program called Genesis up
So
in
are you in Idaho growing up? Is this Idaho?
no, I grew up in Utah.
Utah? Where at?
So near Tremonton.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I later
basically
moved.
Idaho.
Yeah, basically Idaho. Yeah, yeah. I later moved to Ogden, and that's where I spent the
Okay.
final years of my addiction before I came into treatment. But
So you went to like a youth center, kind of?
yeah, I remember when I was in DT and I was scared. I wanted to go home, and I was talking to my probation officer on the phone, and she kind of broke the news to me, like, you're not going home anytime soon. You're going to a program for 6 months. Yeah, it was kind of, I guess you could say, traumatizing to a degree to get taken away from everything I know and thrown into some program. And in the program, I
You
more
don't
or
need to
less,
name the program, but where was it? Was it like in Utah, or was it were you out of state, or?
it was in Draper.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep.
So you went to school there, everything, huh?
Yeah, so you would do like school for half of the day, and then the other half of the day you would do community service to work
Okay.
off community service hours. Um, and in there was some people that I looked up to for the wrong reasons, I guess you could say. And they were talking about hard drugs. And I kind of got educated on hard drugs before I'd even tried them. And
Mhm.
it got me really curious. And I guess you could say I got some reservations to do hard drugs when I got out. And when I got out, I did. Um,
How
I
old
was
were
still
you
on
when you got
probation.
out?
What's that?
How old were you when you got out?
16?
16. So you go back home.
Yeah.
Okay. How was that with your parents? I mean, were they involved in when you were down at that center? Were they involved in that, or what was the situation?
Yeah, they would come visit me. Um, and yeah, I'm sure it was really stressful on them. No parent wants to see their kid get into trouble and do things that harm themselves.
So did they decide to send you there, or did the court say you're going there?
The court did. Yep.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it was the court's decision.
Okay. So you get home and you're like, okay, I'm going to try out what these dudes were talking about.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. I mean, it didn't happen right away. But I think by the time I was 17, I tried meth, and I was still on probation, mind you, and I kept getting dirty UAs. I got like four MIPs, which is minor in possession of tobacco, while I was in school. I got kicked out of Bear River High, and I went to an alternative high school for a while. Um, and I got introduced to another substance, spice, because it didn't show up on UAs. And something about the rush of it, it was even more intense than weed. Sometimes it would give me that panicky feeling, but I don't know, something about that rush I kind of fell in love with. It really took me out of the moment and took me into a different place, I guess you could say. Um, um, I ended up like right before I turned 18. I think I got caught with some spice or something like a month before I turned 18, and so they sent me to DT until I turned 18, and then unsuccessfully terminated me from probation. So I spent my 18th birthday in DT, and I got out and I was off probation, and I felt like I'm gonna be good now. I'm free. I don't have to deal with probation. That was my problem, right?
Hmm.
Um, after after I'd gotten off probation, I started ordering this spice off of the dark web, and I would mix it with like cough medicine, and I had some seizures. They sent me to the hospital more than once.
Wow.
Um, yeah, yeah. My mom was cutting my hair in the kitchen, and I fell out of the chair, went into a seizure, started foaming at the mouth. My dad was doing chest compressions on me. The
Wow.
ambulance came. So I got put back on probation because the cops came too. And yeah, this is only a couple months off probation. And I'm trying to think of the next significant trouble with the law that got me sent to jail. I think I had a dirty UA, and then I didn't show up for court. And so I picked up warrants, and within like a month or two, I was caught, and I was sentenced, and I was caught with more drugs. And they gave me 6 months jail and like another 2 years on probation. And
What were you getting caught? Was it drug related stuff?
what was I getting caught with?
Yeah. Was it all drug related stuff?
Yeah, I think it was like spice and a spice pipe, something like that.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, jail was even harder because I don't know, I was only 18. I was the youngest kid in there. I remember feeling scared. I remember like just being full of regret. Um, I actually wanted to change at this point because the consequences were outweighing the benefits.
Hmm.
Um, and I did everything I could in there. I tried working the steps. I had a step working guide I remember in there, and I tried kind of dabbling with the steps, but I didn't know what I was doing. I don't think I made it past step 4. Um, but before I was getting out, I was so certain that I was going to be good. I could have put my hand on a Bible and swore I'm never going to use drugs again. Like I truly
Hmm.
believed that.
Hmm.
And once I got out, I had my phone started blowing up with messages from old friends, and within 3, 4 hours, I was smoking weed and getting high. And I remember thinking like, what the hell? How did this happen again? I swore I wasn't going to do this.
Hmm.
Um, and I kind of started getting into meth at that time too. Um, and my family life at home with my parents is suffering. They can see what the addiction is doing to me. I'm always getting in fights with my mom and dad. I hate being at home. I'm rebellious. If they tell me to do one thing, I do the opposite just because I'm a rebel.
Hmm.
Um, Kind of the same situation happened. I piss dirty. I get I get scheduled a court date. Or no, actually this time something different happened. I'm sorry. I was walking I was going to school in Brigham City, Utah, in adult education, trying to get my GED. And on payday, I would walk from school to my drug dealer's house to the courthouse to pay on my fines and then back to school. And I picked up my drugs. And then as I was walking into the courthouse, I put the spice and the meth in my underwear. And I walked into court, paid my fines, and walked out. And I was going to stop at this spot I would smoke at before going back to school and realized that the drugs were nowhere to be found. They weren't in my underwear. So I retraced my steps everywhere. I'm starting to panic because my worry is that they're in the courtroom. They fell out of my
Right.
pant leg. And so, stupidly enough, I walk back into the courtroom. And right as I walk in, I see the bag of spice sitting on the counter. And there's 2 cops looking down at me like, we know this was you. Like, what are you doing back here? And I just remember this like impending doom feeling. It was pretty awful. Yeah, my PO shows up at my doorstep the next day. They tell me I got court and it doesn't look good. They search my room, they find some more stuff.
They didn't arrest you there in the
They
court.
didn't arrest me there because I don't think they had the
They
proof
had
yet.
enough.
They wanted to go back on the cameras and stuff.
Gotcha.
Um, of course, I didn't show up for court. I didn't want to. I didn't dare to. Um, and on a late night in the middle of the winter, one of my friends invited me to go to Logan, Utah with him. And I don't know if you know where Plymouth, Utah is,
Hmm.
little tiny town. So that's the specific town that I grew up in. And I remember my mom like begging me not to leave that night. And I kind of had like a feeling that something bad was going to happen if I did. But my friend had drugs and I wanted to get high. And that outweighed my bad feeling. That outweighed my mother's concern. And I left anyways. And long story short, I ended up getting arrested in Logan and sentenced to another 9 months in jail. Um,
Get a DUI or what was the?
no, it was pretty stupid. We were walking around Logan and it was late at night and my friend was having some kind of an argument with his parents, and so all the stores were closing and we wandered into the hospital and I smoked spice in the bathroom and passed out and I woke up to security guards like tapping me on the shoulder.
Hmm.
And they called the cops, of course, and yeah, got arrested. Um, This time in jail was a little bit different. It seemed like I knew how to do time better, and I knew some people, and I started kind of hanging out with the what I thought were the cool people in there, the hard criminals that talked about hard drugs, and um, I worked my way up into the work release dorm where I was on a garden crew, and they would let us go outside and like take care of this garden, um, which was nice. But in that dorm, there was a lot of drugs because people come in and out every day for work. And that's where I got introduced to my drug of choice, opiates. A guy that I looked up to, like I said, for the wrong reasons, thought he was really cool. And he was a really like buff, intelligent, funny. Like he made his disease look attractive, I guess you could say. Um, and he just had this sense of humor. He had this like glow about him, and he offered me Subutex, and I snorted this little tiny line in there, and I'll never forget that feeling. Like all my guilt and shame of the past went away. Like doing time became so easy. I just like melted into my seat, and I instantly knew, like in that moment, this is my new purpose. This is my new thing. Like I fell in love. I always liked getting high, but I'd never experienced a high like that. Um, and so I started pretty much doing it every day in there. And by the time I got out, I already had a habit of doing it, and I had connections on where to get it. Um, around Once I get out of jail, around this time, that's when I meet Lexi, my fiance I'm still with today by some miracle. Um, doing Subutex for about 6 months, and one day my plug says, I'm not carrying Subutex anymore, but I have this stuff called black heroin. Um, so if you want some of that, um, and I tried it, and it was everything I liked about Subutex and even more. It was even more euphoric. I could get high on it even more times throughout the day. Everything about it was better. I also moved out of my parents' house in Plymouth and moved to Ogden during this time, and was working for
How
my
old are
older
you now?
brother.
Are you in your early 20s now?
28.
28, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I was around 20, 21 at this time, and
No, you're 28 now, but yeah, at that time you're 21.
yeah,
So it's interesting you used a drug that people use to wean off of opiates, and you did that first, and then you went to heroin.
I know, right? Weird how that backwards how that worked.
Yeah.
Yep. Um. So yeah, I got this job with my older brother at a construction company that installs natural gas pipeline, and he's kind of looked at really highly respected at this company, and I felt like everyone in the company kind of had expectations of me living up to my brother's potential because he's a really hard worker and he's a perfectionist and he does really good work, and I wanted to aspire to be like that, you know. And what I noticed with opiates and work is not only did it make me like social, calm, and happy, but I felt like it made me work harder. In retrospect, it was more or less probably just an illusion because I was feeling good while I was working. But um, the shitty part was when I didn't have it, my work ethic suffered. And so it kind of was a coping mechanism, I guess you could say, to keep up with the heavy workload. It was really hard work too. Natural gas pipeline isn't something you want to mess around with. Um,
Right.
they're pretty strict. Whitaker Construction is kind of looked at like an elite construction company. So there's a lot of hand shoveling. A lot of these natural gas pipelines, you can't dig with track hose when you get close to them. You got to hand shovel everything. And yeah, it was tough. Um, I had one last experience with spice, and this was the last time I ever smoked it. Before I moved out, my dad helped me get a truck, and I want to say that day after work, I couldn't. This was before I tried heroin. I couldn't get any Subutex, but I knew someone that had spice, and so I drove my truck to go pick up some spice. And I took one hit, one tiny hit. It was like a new spice. It had been years since I'd smoked it. And I'll tell you what, like the chemical, there's so many different chemicals of spice.
Yeah.
You never know what you're gonna get, and this shit was different. I took literally the tiniest leaf I could like pick out of the bag, put it in a bowl, took the tiniest hit, and breathed it out as fast as I could. And it sent me into a panic. And I'm sitting in my truck thinking that someone maybe saw me take a hit in 7-Eleven, and I panicked and started driving. Um, I'm swerving in and out of the lanes. I ended up crashing my truck into a telephone pole.
Oh, wow.
The telephone pole fell on my truck. It took out power for the block. Um, and someone had been following me and already had called me into the cops. So it wasn't long before the cops were there. They find the spice. I'm still on probation. Um, and it was pretty miraculous that I didn't go to jail that night. The cop did arrest me, but before he was going to take me to jail, they needed to take me to the hospital to do, a physical evaluation to make sure I was good. And I told my brother that before I got into the cop car on the phone, and my brother meets me at the police station, and he talks the cop out of letting me go to jail that night. So I didn't go to jail. My brother's kind of good at persuading people, and he was saying that, I'm his foreman. This is my little brother. He needs to be at work tomorrow. Is there any way we can just let him go home tonight and he can come for court?
Right.
And the cop went with that. I ended up paying for an expensive lawyer, thousands of dollars. And I got lucky. I think I got sentenced like 3 weekends in jail and more court fines and a couple extra years on probation. And I had like a year over my head. It was right after that court date that I switched from subs to heroin. And the thing about subs is most drug tests don't test for it. Whitaker's a drug testing construction company, so I didn't have to worry about drug tests there when I was on it, and probation didn't test for it. So it was kind of a hack in the system, but heroin is, it shows up on everything.
Yeah.
So there came a day, like maybe 2 months after I wrecked my truck, not long, that I had a choice, and that choice was either go to probation and check in with them or go meet my plug. I was also pretty physically addicted to opiates at this point, and I was sick. And I remember setting an expectation in my mind in that moment that if I don't go to probation, I'm going to do a year in jail, one way or another. Someday down the road, this is going to end badly.
Right.
And I'm still like 20, 21 at this point. And of course, I didn't go to probation. I went to the plug and got drugs. And yeah, the stress, I knew there was warrants for out for my arrest, and I'm working for my brother, and I lie to my family and I tell them that I got an early termination.
Right.
And the stress of the warrants and the possibility of, getting pulled over and arrested at any moment is kind of feeding into my addiction, making me want to use more so that I can cover up that fear, or use so much that I would forget. And
Isn't
the
that
heroin,
ironic? The very thing that's getting you into that's causing the problem is also a solution in your head.
yeah,
Did you hear me?
yeah, absolutely,
Yeah. So, yeah.
yeah.
So what was your decision?
What was my decision?
Yeah. What did you go get loaded, or did you go to?
Did it cut out there?
Yeah. Are you on? I got you
Yeah.
now.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so that day I chose to go get high, of course. One or the other had to go, either getting high or probation. And I was physically addicted. I needed that heroin to go to work. I needed it to function. I needed it for my emotional security. I was down to my core, powerless, and I was under the control of my disease. And yeah, I went and got high, and the stress of having those warrants just fed into my addiction. And the progressiveness of the heroin addiction at that point got significantly worse. It went from just smoking it like in the morning before work to smoking it in the morning, at lunch, right after work, right before bed so I could sleep. And it was getting really expensive. And
Yeah.
on top of that, my tolerance was building and I wasn't really getting very high. So it
Yeah.
wasn't doing its job. And I wanted a solution. And about 2 years go by in this time. And I'm doing other drugs too, meth, acid, um, weed, really anything I could get my hands on the weekends. I'm getting loaded constantly. I would show up to work on Monday, still a little bit high on meth and paranoid, and I would do more heroin to cope with that. Um, but yeah, I came to a point where I wanted a solution, and one of my drug associates told me about this place called the methadone clinic, and so I went there. And it worked good for a while because I wasn't then illegally getting high. I was getting high on my own prescription, and it was
Mhm.
really getting me high. Methadone is super strong. Um, but what I didn't realize when I got into methadone is what it was doing to my tolerance and how much it was affecting my opioid receptors in my brain. After about 8 months of being on methadone maintenance, I was having a pattern of failing drug tests for like benzos and other drugs that are dangerous to mix with methadone. And so the doctor cut me off. He
Okay.
no longer was willing to give me a prescription of methadone. And
So
it
you
took
had a
about,
prescription for your house, or did you have to go into the clinic and get it every
yeah, I'd
month?
have to go into the clinic every day and get it.
Okay.
Yep. I think he would give me like an extra one on the weekend so I didn't have to come in on Sunday, but that was about it.
Okay.
But 6 days into it, into not having methadone, a withdrawal crept up on me that was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I could feel it
Yeah.
in my bones. I could feel it in my head. I could feel it in my attitude. I was shaking. I was cold and sweating and just the sickest I had ever been in my life.
Yeah.
And I was super desperate to get out of that feeling. And so I went and bought, like a $50 worth of heroin, and I smoked it all in one sitting. And it didn't do a damn thing. It didn't get me high. It made me feel okay for 2 or 3 hours. And then I was right back to being sick. And
Mhm.
so I kind of hit a dilemma. And my addict brain thinks, well, the next best thing to do is to graduate to the needle. And so I had someone teach me how to shoot up, and I fell in love with that slowly. It kind of weirded me out at first, but it like slowly sunk its hooks in me, and before I knew it, I was in over my head with it. I loved it. And the first shot he gave me, he mixed it with meth because he said it would make it safer, less chance of overdose. And so I got into shooting meth and heroin. And that was a line that if I could go back and change something in my addiction, that's a line I wish I never would have crossed.
Yeah.
Um, the cravings, the obsession of the mind, the compulsion of doing it, um, the drive and the intensity of cravings, everything just skyrockets to another level. And my addiction progressed even more, as you would guess. It got to the point where I had no veins left in my arms. I was shooting up in my legs because there was nothing left. Um, I lost my job at Whitaker. I remember I had used fake pee to get me by for 4.5 years at the company until the day came when I didn't have any money to buy fake pee because all my money went on drugs, and I got hit with a random UA and I lost that job. And I remember making my brother one promise. When I started this company, he made me promise that I would never fail a drug test and make him look bad. And I did. And I felt really ashamed. It affected my self-esteem, my sense of self-worth. Um, And I'm living in an apartment with my girlfriend, and bills are stacking up. And um, I thought the next best move was to get a roommate to help pay with rent. And what not a better roommate than my drug dealer, because then
Yeah.
I have drugs at my house. So I had my drug dealer move in with me. And I would describe this as kind of the beginning of my rock bottom. Um, I remember kind of having glimpses of clarity. There was meth, heroin, and fentanyl in my apartment all the time. And I remember looking in the mirror one day, and I had been up for like 2 or 3 days on meth. I had like little bruise marks and trax marks all over my arms, and my eyes were sunken in, and my pupils were dilated. And I looked like shit, and I felt like shit. And it was like for the first time I could truly see who I was in that moment. And I just started bawling. Like I
Mm.
just started bawling. I felt like shit. Um, my tolerance was so high, the drugs were barely working. Of course, I would just do more to try and cover that up. Um, and my girlfriend's parents were starting to catch on something was going on. And one day they just come pick her up, and they don't tell me they're not going to bring her back because they know something is
She
going
used
on.
to do.
So she didn't for the first 3 years, but the last two, she started to get into it with me, and she was physically dependent on heroin too. And I got her into that. I talked her into it, manipulated her, and my intention for that was completely self-centered, because I knew if she would get into heroin with me, then it would make it that much easier for me to talk her into spending her money on drugs so that I could get high.
Mhm.
Um, Completely self-centered, full of apathy, and I knew what I was doing was wrong, but it was like I didn't care in that moment. Um, so her parents come get her, and I'm at my house alone. My Wi-Fi's turned off because I can't pay the Wi-Fi bill. I've pawned my Xbox. I've pawned all the shit that means anything to me. My house is a mess. My drug dealer's living with me. I spend most of my days just sick, waiting for the next fix, begging my drug dealer to give me a little bit because I didn't have any money or anything to offer. And on a Tuesday morning at like 10:30, I have two older brothers. One lives in California and one lives in Tremont.
Mhm.
And they both showed up on my doorstep on a Tuesday. And one's all the way from California, so I thought it was weird. And they took me out for breakfast, and they pretty much said, Hayden, we know everything. Um, we want to do an intervention. We're scared for your life. Uh, and I didn't feel ready at that point. I didn't feel like I wanted to change, but I knew that I wanted something different. My life was internally and externally unmanageable, and I
Okay.
was full of fear from my warrants. I didn't want to go to jail. I didn't want to lose Lexi. So I packed one bag. I left my TV, my couch, my bed, half my clothes, my dresser, all that stuff I left at that apartment, and I never got it back. But my mom lives in Albion, Idaho, and she has for like 7 years. Um, and so I went straight to her house. Of course, before I left, I broke into my drug dealer's room because he wasn't home, and um, took the rest of his drugs, the rest of his fentanyl. So I had something to keep me well before I went into treatment. And that is when I started calling treatment centers. I called Moonlight Mountain. They didn't have a bed for a couple weeks. I called the Ren'ais'sance Ranch. They didn't have a bed for a couple weeks. I'm running out of drugs. I'm not sure what to do, but I'm just kind of holding on. And
Mhm.
Forrest calls me and said, "Hey, we have a bed open. We can get you in tomorrow at like 4:30 or something." And so I did. Um,
So
I was
what led
thinking,
you to want to reach out? Like
why
what
did I
was
want to
the,
reach out?
what was the final like I'm done?
I think honestly, when I first came into treatment, I was doing it more because my family pushed me to than anything. I knew I wanted something different, but I didn't know if I was entirely ready to give up a part of myself, is what it felt like. Using heroin and doing drugs that many years kind of developed as a part of my identity. And when I had to let that go, it was kind of like an identity crisis. Like, I saw myself as a professional heroin user, so without the heroin, like, who the fuck am I? And
Mm-hmm.
kind of like a grieving process. I had I had some expectations on what being sober would be like. I had expectations on what the ranch would be like. I thought it would be a pretty dull experience. I thought it would be like one of those really boring lives. I remember in my addiction, in the glory days when it was fun, being sober, normal people doing normal people things and thinking, man, how boring. If they only knew what it was like to do these drugs, they would really know what fun was.
Yeah.
And so I thought that that's what I was going back to, was like some boring kind of lifestyle. Um, and I was on this opiate bender for the better part of 7 years by this time, 6 or 7 years. So I had two big fears. One of those fears was facing my warrants, and the other fear was facing my withdrawals.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I knew it was going to be a rough go on the withdrawals. But yeah, I show up to the ranch day one. I get greeted by Alan. He gives me a hug. Um, and I go downstairs and meet some of the dudes, and I immediately kind of start making connections and thinking like, man, this guy's cool. Like, this guy is just like me. And still to this day, 2 years later, I'm still best friends with a lot of these people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was it was difficult at first with the withdrawals, but once I kind of got used to the program and I got used to the brotherhood, um, it was hard to focus on my withdrawals because the brothers were always trying to make me laugh or get me out to do, fun things, or getting into deep conversations. It was like I couldn't just sit there and focus on my withdrawals. I was occupied with the brotherhood, and that
Yeah.
was exactly what I needed to get me through that withdrawal phase. And it lasted about 30 days.
Wow.
Um, but I'll never forget the first few mornings waking up with this profound sense of gratitude for not feeling my joints and my bones ache from opiates. It was like a high in itself. It was like freedom at its finest.
So did you have
And
any did you use any like Suboxone or anything?
yeah, we did a Suboxone taper,
Okay.
and that did help. Yep. Yep, the taper was like a week long or so, and
Right.
once the taper was over, uh yeah, the withdrawals, if I didn't have the taper, they would be at like a 9 or 10, and that took them down to like a 4 to 6.
Gotcha.
Made it a lot more manageable once I came off the taper.
Right. So when did you start? Took you about a month to start feeling just kind of halfway normal, huh? Or
Yeah,
physically anyway. Okay.
yeah, physically about a month. Yep. Yep, and it was around that time I finished my step one. During when I was presenting my step one, I left out a couple of overdose experiences in my story, not on purpose, but um, I'm telling this story of like kind of gnarly graphic things, and I'm extremely apathetic. I'm not showing any emotion. I'm not feeling any emotion. I'm just telling my story monotone, and obviously get called out for it. And I realized that I have a master's degree in apathy. Like, I don't give a shit about other people's feelings because I'm so self-centered from this disease. Um, so apathy was one of my biggest character defects that I've spent a lot of time working on. And my first step four experience was pretty interesting. Like I said, that apathy, I kind of was rolling on that until I got to the end of step three, and I made that decision to turn my will and my life over to God. And when I did that, it was as if God pulled that apathy from my heart. And as I'm writing down these resentments that I held against myself for the first time in my life, I felt empathy for the damage and the harm I had caused all these people. And it was like having to relive all of these experiences in the moment now. And it was emotionally draining. I cried so much. I was on it for like 12 days. I had like 8 pages of resentments, and half of them were for myself. Um, but something about it um, also gave me a feeling of peace
Yeah.
because I heard people like Alan and other people that were further in the program kind of share their experience, strength, and hope with me that was based on the 12 steps. And so I didn't have faith from my experience, but I had faith in the people that I trusted that were telling me about these 12 steps. And so I
Yeah.
trusted this and knowing that it's the solution and it's what's going to make me happy, joyous, and free and sober. Um, Doing this also brought me a certain level of serenity that's hard to describe. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, after like 12 days, I present my step 5. I remember feeling literally physically lighter when I walked out of that room. It felt like
Yeah.
each step was a little bit lighter. Um, I felt that was like the start of a spiritual experience, a drastic change in my core beliefs, a drastic change in my perspective on the world. Um, it was amazing. Um, I had my
So you did your
sister
fifth
died when
step
she
in a
was.
group.
What's that?
You did your fifth step in a group setting.
Oh no, no,
Okay.
no! I did it one on one with someone.
Cool. So how was that?
It was it was awesome. I mean, I went into it really nervous and was kind of I don't know, not really wanting to do it, but once I got into it and I was talking about all these dark experiences, right, of my past, and it
Yeah.
was so hard for me to see the good out of any of these situations. Like, what good could possibly come of this? What's the point of this? And the guy I was doing it with looked at me and he said, all these dark times that you're telling me about in your past will be your biggest power tools to helping the next addict. And that's when my perspective kind of flipped and I was able to see what this journey was really about. And
Yeah.
and yeah, it was a spiritual experience for sure. Um,
How long
Step
between
7,
when you started your fourth till you did your fifth? You remember?
about 12 days.
That's a long time.
It was an extra long one. One of the reasons being um it was in the early days of the Hayden facility and there was very limited step 5 people.
Yeah.
And so we kept waiting and waiting for someone from Utah to come down and I ended up asking Big Book Dave to do it. He was
Okay.
managing the Band of Brothers construction at the time. And he ended up doing it and it was awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes you start the fourth and you're looking at all the crap. And the
Mm-hmm.
longer you stay in that, it's just like heavy and heavy and heavy. And for anybody listening, if you can schedule your fifth as soon as you can, once you start your fourth, you don't sit
Yeah.
around for a few days wallowing in the mud, because
Yeah.
it can be kind of demeaning. It's heavy. It's heavy.
It is. I
So
was always told to work it like my life depended on it because it does.
yeah, for sure. So what you get out of residential? Did you go to aftercare? Did you do day treatment and outpatient and sober living and all that?
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely did. Yeah, I went into
Let me back
PHP
up. Let
and
me back up. When in res did it just click? Like when were you like, okay, I'm in, like because I don't know that everybody's all the way in. We talk a lot about people being 51% in, that's all you need. At what
yeah,
point were you like, okay, I definitely got a problem. I definitely know more about my medical issue, my disease. And I mean, when I found that out, part of my shame went away because I thought, well, I'm just a bad machine. I just can't quit. Why can't I exercise willpower? Why can't I just stop when I start? All that stuff. And so, but do you remember a moment where it was like, okay, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I'm in.
I would definitely say after I finished my step 5 and my step 7 in house.
Okay.
Those were both very profound moments in my early recovery, and I look back at them as being sacred because during that time is when I genuinely started to change and had that clarity. And I also found something in recovery that was better than what the drugs were offering me.
Yeah.
Um, some might call it a pink cloud. And it felt like my personal will, my desire, was aligning with God's will. And it was a really cool thing. Um, yeah, so I had a sponsor lined up before I got out of house, which is absolutely essential, of course. Um, and also before I got out of house, I got religious about doing dailies, finding that daily reprieve. There's a saying that's always stuck with me. It says, just like your recovery from, or just like a shower from yesterday won't keep you clean today, your recovery from yesterday won't keep you clean today either. That's why what
Yeah.
we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition.
So what are your dailies, if you don't mind me asking? What do you do every morning?
So it's changed since I was in early recovery. In IOP, I worked the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I would read 317, 417, 83 through 88, page 99 in the 12 by 12, the prayer of St. Francis. Um,
You do the prayer of St. Francis.
um,
That's awesome.
yeah, I love that prayer.
It's one of my
Um,
dailies. In fact,
yeah, it's a
it's
good one.
sitting on my wall or just to the right.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a really cool prayer. It
it
is.
is.
Prayer, of course, keeping that conscious contact with my higher power. PIs, I did PIs every night. Well, maybe six nights a week for I would say 9 or 10 months. I was pretty religious about all those things.
So PIs, for
Um,
those of you who don't know, are personal inventories every night. Kind of a step 10-ish sort of diary, whatever you want to call it, but just writing down all the stuff that's going on in your life. There's a lot of therapeutic value in getting crap out of your head and the ping ponging in your head and writing it down. There's something that happens in our brain when we write, and it's important. So that's cool. That's a good thing.
hmm Yeah, yeah. I always kind of looked at it as being able to maintain my self-awareness. If I lose touch of my defects and my assets, then how do I know which direction I'm really going? And being able to put it on paper, I've always felt like helps solidify and manifest it really into this world. Um,
Yeah, for sure.
and so yeah, it was important for me to do that, and meditation too.
So what kind of role
Meditation.
does your higher power play? What was that hard for you to surrender to God or whatever you call your higher power? How was that journey?
Um, so I've always believed in God. I've always believed that the world is too big, too beautiful. It seems that it's obvious that there's some sort of intelligent design behind it. I grew up LDS, but I kind of got pushed away from that church by my own decisions and my own beliefs that other people were judging me for my behaviors, et cetera, et cetera. So I pretty much lost touch with God, even though I knew He was there the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I would say I started to reconnect with Him. The first prayer, I remember it. The first prayer I said in residential was before I started my step 2 packet, and I just simply asked for guidance. And I remember a subtle feeling of peace kind of wash over me and serenity, like everything's gonna be all right. Just do this packet thoroughly.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of the start of my spiritual experience, you could say. And a quote from the big book that's always stuck out to me in the beginning of We
Oop, you're cutting out. I don't want to miss
if you are
this.
of the alcoholic type, you may be suffering from an incurable illness. What's
You
that?
you cut out. Read that again from We Agnostics.
The chapter 4, We Agnostics, in the first paragraph, it says, if you are of the alcoholic type, you may be suffering from an incurable illness which only a spiritual experience can overcome.
Yeah.
That really resonated with me. And it also kind of leaves you asking the question, so what is that spiritual experience?
Yeah.
Um,
We
and I
just
think that
studied that
that,
in
that
I do a big book study every Monday, and we just studied that. And can I read something real quick?
yeah, absolutely.
There was um, uh, the page after that, 45. It's kind of familiar part of the beginning of it. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live. And it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how are we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. That's
Mm,
exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. That means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral.
mm.
And I love that.
Yeah, I love that too. It gives me goosebumps.
Yeah. 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 So,
Yeah.
what's your sobriety date?
June 3rd of 2022.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
So you're no longer celebrating in months. That's good. It's
Yeah,
like it's
yeah,
like babies, You're like, how old's your baby? Oh, he's 19 months now. He's 18 months, and in sobriety, once you get that 18-month chip, then you're you're solid on years, right?
yep, pretty much, huh?
What would you what I don't want to say advice, but what the people that might be struggling that are listening, what would you say to them to give them hope? What would you tell them?
I would say that the proof is in the pudding. Before 1936, when the Big Book was written, or 1937, whenever it was, there was no solution per se for alcoholics. Um, and since the 12 steps have been formulated, um, there is a solution, and it's worked in the lives of millions around the world. And it doesn't matter if you're into heroin, meth, alcohol, whatever substance. The substance is irrelevant because it's all one disease, and more importantly, it's all treated with one solution. And I believe wholeheartedly, if I can come out of the depth of my addiction and live the life I can today directly as a result of the 12 steps, then really anyone can. You just have to have that want, that desperation, and that desire, that drive. You need to go searching in recovery for something that that is better than your addiction.
Right. So what's your life like now?
Um, so I always thought it would be cool to work at the ranch. I never really thought it would actually happen until, it did. So I have a 1-year-old daughter. Well, she turns one on the 25th of this month, and I get to be a sober present father, and that is one of the most rewarding, amazing experiences I've ever had. I named her Serenity. She's
Did you
just a little
really?
doll. Yeah, I really should. Yep.
So before
Yep.
you finish that, my daughter, I found a picture. I was up in Bluffdale doing a group, and I found a picture from 2003 at one of the golf tournaments. 2004, and my daughter was a couple years old, and she was sitting on my lap, and there's all these ranch guys, and so she was kind of raised in recovery, and she's on an LDS mission up in Montana. And for those of you who don't know, when you go on an LDS mission, you get a little plaque that sits in your ward and your picture, and you have your favorite scripture. Well, she put the Serenity Prayer. That's her. That's her scripture. So that's cool. You named your daughter
Oh, nice.
Serenity. That's an
Yeah.
awesome prayer to teach your kids.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So she's one
Yeah.
years old.
Yeah. Yeah. Turns one this month. Yep.
All right. So she'll never ever see you high.
Yeah. She never has to see me high. And, I work with a lot of people that struggle with the relationships and the damage they've caused in the lives of their children. And so I just have a deep and profound sense of gratitude for being able to show up for my daughter, being present, and being able to watch her grow up and provide for her everything she needs.
Yeah,
Beyond fulfilling. It's like a spiritual experience of its own.
that's awesome. And so
Yeah.
this is the same. This is with Lexi.
Yeah. You know,
Awesome. So you guys survived all that crap.
by some miracle, yeah. Yeah. Um, there was a rocky point in our relationship in ILP where things were kind of up in the air, and I was working my program so hard, and I had so much faith in the universe's will for my life. I believed wholeheartedly that God's will for me was to be happy, joyous, and free. And I also believed that there's like a current in this world, like a current that the universe tries to take you. And I was just riding that current, and it seemed like at the time that my life was going one way and her life was going another way.
Was
And
she doing
I
any
was able to
work
make peace
on
with
her
that.
own? Was she doing any
What's that?
work? Like, was she doing any work in Al-Anon or family group or anything like that?
At the time, she had kind of swapped her, she later got into the 12 steps, but at the time, she swapped her heroin addiction for alcoholism.
Okay.
Um,
It's
so yeah,
easier to
that
get.
was,
It's easier to get, you know.
yeah, it's easier to get. It's legal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, dude,
And it was like,
thank you for sharing your message, man. I don't know you very well. I've had the honor of being up there and watching you in TC groups and watching you in staff meeting, and you've just got that I don't know what you call it, that it thing. Um, Not everybody has it for the ability to work in the field and still maintain your sobriety and have good boundaries. But I watch you with the men out there, and I watch the love you give them and the hope that you give them, and the hope you've just given a bunch of people by being willing to share your story. So, I just want to thank you for coming on. Thanks for sharing everything and being open and vulnerable. And I don't know you well, but I genuinely love you. I really appreciate what you do and how you do it, who you are. And now that I found out even more, um, I just admire you even more.
yeah, well, I appreciate that, HR. Super grateful to have this opportunity.
You got it, buddy. Well, have a good night. Thanks again for being on here. And if any of you are up in meetings in Central Idaho, is that Central Idaho? Hayburn,
Yeah, South
Rupert.
Central, yep.
What's the other town? Burley. If you're in there, you'll see this dude in a meeting. And if you see this dude in a meeting, go up and give him a hug and go take him out and buy him a sandwich. All right, buddy. Take care, Hayden. Thanks again, man.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, HR. You have a good night.
You too.